Okay, my name is Larry McGlynn, and you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, Vanessa Maria Graber will report on the city's use of artificial intelligence and technology, and Lisa Haver will provide an update on the Philadelphia Board of Education. Vanessa, how are you tonight?
I'm doing good. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. Before we get into your report, I think we have to talk a little bit about what's happening in Los Angeles. This is incredibly troubling, and I've been going through different articles and press releases, including one from the LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, who says they do not want the National Guard in Los Angeles because it will hinder their own efforts and get in the way. The LAPD is taking the side of protesters, which you would never expect. I know you've been following this as well, Vanessa. What is your take on what's happening right now?
Well, there is a lot going on. So we're going to try to take a step back and zoom out a bit to look at the bigger picture. And what's been happening since President Trump took office is a nationwide effort to deport millions of people and take them out of the U.S. And so mass deportation raids have been happening at both U.S. cities and rural areas all across the country. And ICE is the agency that carries out, is like the law enforcement arm of immigration. And they are carrying out this mission, right, to capture people and detain them and either deport them out of the country or keep them imprisoned in for-profit detention centers. Many of those for-profit detention centers are owned by an organization called GEO Group.
Yep.
GEO Group gave a substantial contribution to President Trump's campaign, and you would never guess who was a lobbyist for GEO Group before they joined the Trump administration. Do you know? It was Pat Bondi, the Attorney General. And so I just want to draw those connections for people so they understand what is happening. Now, I think that, the subject of deportation yields many different perspectives, but I think one thing that we're starting to see a lot more people be on the same page is about the subject of due process. And what's happening with these immigrants is that they're being denied due process. Many of the people that are being taken away by ICE are legal in the sense that they have a legal right to be here. And so one thing I want to distinguish is that undocumented is just one term to describe someone's legal status. However, there are many people here that have temporary visas. They might have a visa application pending. They might have been applying for asylum, are refugees. Some people have temporary protective status because they come from a particular country. Some people are on a visa where they're getting ready to marry somebody and they've come from another country. We've all seen that show, 90 Day Fiance, right? There are the visas that allow people to work here. So people from other countries, that's why we're seeing a lot of these academics and folks. And then there's people who are permanent residents, people that have green cards. So there's many different levels to it. And everyone, who is not a U.S. citizen has been subject to or in danger of being detained by ICE. And on top of that, some of these people have actually been sent to other countries like El Salvador, countries in Africa, right? There was a group of people that wound up in Djibouti last week because they were denied entry or they weren't allowed to stay in Sudan. And so, there's been planes going back to Cuba and Venezuela. So in many cases, people do not have any opportunity to plead their case in front of a deportation hearing proceeding or, allowed legal counsel with an immigration attorney, no day in court. And so I think this is the problem that many people are seeing. And also the way in which people are literally getting kidnapped by masked federal agents who are unidentifiable, right? They're doing so in very aggressive, very violent manners. They're taking people at their jobs. They're attempting to go to schools. They are going to public places and churches. And this is terrorizing the community. And I think what we saw happen in Los Angeles has been the community's response to these raids, the denial of due process, and the violence that's been inflicted upon immigrant and Latino communities. And so as a result, we saw people peacefully protesting, trying to disrupt ICE raids, and those peaceful protests were met with violence. And so there have been many elected officials, including Mayor Bass, including Representative Maxine Waters, who have been to the protests. They have clarified that they are in fact peaceful. And it has been the federal government, with ICE and also the LAPD, who has reacted violently to the protesters who are merely engaging in self-defense. Now, when you have large crowds of people, there's always a possibility that people are going to vandalize. People have been setting off fireworks. People have been destroying police cars and also the unmanned Waymos, the self-driving vehicles. And so that is also true. And I think those are a lot of the images that pervade the media. And what we're not seeing is a lot of people peacefully assembled, exercising their first rights to protest. When these images came out of LA and we saw the response that it was met with, I think that sparked other solidarity protests across the country in cities where they're also experiencing the violence, aggression, and terrorism of ICE. And so we saw protests in New York, in Chicago, in Philadelphia, in Austin, Atlanta, in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. And they've been continuing to spread throughout the week at cities and small towns across America. And so this week we are gearing up for another national day of action. And by we, I mean the press, those of us who are out on the streets covering these protests here in Philadelphia. There is a No Kings protest. They expect 80,000 people. There will be protests, again, all across the country, all across the state of Pennsylvania. And that is in stark contrast to the military parade that will happen in our nation's capital to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the military, the armed forces, and President Trump's birthday. And he has threatened if anybody tries to protest in Washington, D.C., they will be met with an overwhelming force. So we're waiting to see what happens. And every day, of course, new conditions emerge, new information comes to light, and the landscape is rapidly changing.
Well, and this is kind of what we expected when Trump won the election. And a lot of people said, oh, people on the right, you're being an alarmist. That's not what's going to happen. Well, it is happening. We're seeing people being persecuted because they exercised their First Amendment right. Trump threatened people if they should go to Washington and protest this ridiculous military parade. I mean, this is exactly what we were concerned about, and it's not hyperbole to say this could be the beginning of something very, very serious, and in my opinion, is a threat to democracy. And if things continue in this way, we're going down a very, very startling path. And it's already begun.
Well, of course, we are students of history. I have studied media and social movements all around the globe, and international journalists, people who are experts on this issue, academics and research, have all shared examples of what an authoritarian or fascist regime looked like, and have pointed to the U.S. and the recent incidents that have happened in the last few months as indicators that these are, in fact, acts of an authoritarianism regime. And so I think we need to take that for what it is and learn from people who have actually experienced these types of dictatorships in their countries. They recognize the signs. They remember how these things started. I think about people in Chile who can talk about the rise of the Pinochet dictatorship and the things that started to happen. I think about friends in the Philippines who talk about what happened when Duarte took power. People, from Russia, right, who remember after the fall of communism and the oligarchs came to power. And so there's many more examples of this that we can point to as a point of comparison. And I think it's the reason why we are alarmed. It is the reason why people feel very fearful. And also this looming threat of martial law, of a law enforcement crackdown, of larger ICE raids, right? Like they're looking to deport millions of people from this country. Many innocent people are getting swept up in the process, and families are torn apart. And we're also seeing the gutting, right, of federally funded social programs, right, and tax cuts for the rich. So there is a lot happening at once. I think it's actually hard for us journalists, right, to keep track of it all as people who follow government policy. But I think it's important to make the connections, right, like how these things are all interrelated. And with that, we've been seeing attacks on press freedom. We've been seeing the dismantling of public media. We've been seeing the prevention of people from being able to express their First Amendment rights. And those are some of the pillars of democracy that are at stake, right, when the government takes action to deny us those rights.
So that's where we are. We're going to keep following this. And next week, we'll be talking more about it because next week we'll know, I think, where we are with this.
Yeah, so my message to people is twofold. I think we have a responsibility to once again warn people about the spreading of disinformation, right? Like that's why we're here, and many other journalists and legitimate news outlets that are here to verify information. So you are going to see a lot of AI generated content. You're going to see photos that have been manipulated. You're going to see headlines that are not accurate. So really do your due diligence during this time to make sure you're not spreading misinformation. And again, you can always email us or DM us on social media at the Hall Monitor if you see something that concerns you and you have no way of fact checking it. I saw a rumor today about mass arrests in Kensington. I was able to fact check that pretty instantly for the person who sent that to me. And so I just want to warn about that. And also, I want to caution people about protests that are not organized by trusted local groups. There was a protest in Philadelphia organized yesterday by seemingly a random individual. When people got to that protest, there were no speakers, there was no rally, there was no legal observers, there was no legal collective, there were no people that were doing media to record and document. And so when the police came and arrested people and violently, so several people were injured, there wasn't really a lot of people there who were experienced enough to guide people to safety and keep them out of harm's way. And so if you do see a flyer for a protest, look into where that came from and make sure that, people from trusted organizations are going to be there. And again, ask questions. Don't just show up to these things because you can be putting yourself at risk, especially now that the police are on high alert for these sort of things.
All right. Now let's switch gears and bring it a little more local. Vanessa, tell us what you're going to be reporting on tonight.
So I interviewed Devin Washington, and he is going to talk with me about a recent initiative that his organization has to get more transparency and accountability from the city around its usage of technology and AI. So let's take a listen to my interview with Devin Washington. Hey, you're listening to the Philadelphia Hall Monitor, and I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber. And right now, we are going to be talking with Devin Washington, the organizing director from the People's Tech Project. The People's Tech Project helps social movements develop a positive vision of how technology can contribute to the logic of a liberatory world, rather than serve as the linchpin of an economic system that puts profit over people and planet. They support community groups fighting for social and tech justice to win a future where technology helps build dignity, justice, and liberation, rather than exacerbating oppression and harm in the hands of big corporations and the state. And from the People's Tech Project, they have a Philly Tech Justice Collective that has issued a sign-on letter to City Council Committee on Technology and Information Services, asking the city to divest from harmful tech in the 2026 budget cycle and hold hearings on the municipal use of AI and automation. And our guest, Devin Washington, who is the organizing director, is going to tell us all about that. Hi, Devin. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your organization, the work that you've been doing here locally in Philadelphia and nationally. And then, let's get into the sign-on letter and petition that you have for the city.
Yeah, sure. So we launched in 2022. We were formerly Movement Alliance Project, where we led a lot of campaigns around like building broadband access here in Philly and across the country, and other tech issues that we were doing as a policy team with Movement Alliance Project. But after the pandemic, we spent some time thinking about, you know, the role of technology and the issues that many organizations and movements were fighting for, and realized that like the time was now for us to spend more time thinking about technology as its own force and its own and how it's impacting all of the issues that we care about. Like in modern day, you know, movements can be fighting for whatever issue. That's affordable housing, better services in their communities, things like that. But all of those issues require technology to implement solutions, right? And even in the policies that are just being passed in city council and in governments across the country, from federal to municipal, we are seeing the role of technology play a bigger and bigger role in how folks are receiving services, how workers are engaging in their workplace. And so given that reality and how we're seeing technology used against all of these folks, we realized that we needed to kind of create a space and an organization where we can fight for a positive vision for what technology should be doing in our communities. And so, I can start with the local work first and get to national, but you might have a question.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great to know that this work like emerged in Philadelphia, but is also having a national impact. So
Mhm.
tell us a little bit more about some of the work that you all have been doing in our city.
Yeah, sure. So in Philly, we started out by saying, like, what do everyday Philadelphians like? How do they see technology and how it shows up in their communities? And if given the choice to control what technology would be doing, or the role of technology, like what would technology do, right? And so what we learned from many workshops and retreats and talking directly with community members is like the opportunity that technology provides is that it creates it creates a possibility for us to have a much larger expanded set of options or solutions to community problems that we've been dealing with, from safety to like the distribution of resources, and even to how we name like the services that we need in our communities, right? So like for instance, 311 is a piece of technology that is utilized in our communities, but if we can imagine what 311 would do, if it was kind of geared to meeting our needs, it would be more about like us being able to identify like this house here is a problem and we need city services to come take care of it. And other things like I'm hungry or I don't feel safe and I need support in feeling safe, right? There's all these opportunities where technology could be providing a solution to these common issues, but because of how technology is developed and sold, it doesn't play that role. Usually what we'll see is that the main goal of tech in government operations, or even corporate in a corporate setting, is to reduce their overhead. So like reduce their reliance on workers, to surveil communities and their workers. So like they want to like, equip the police department with as much technology as possible so that they can one, do more with less police officers, and which would result in more folks being involved in the criminal legal system, whatever penalties that they have coming up. So I think that was the biggest learning from us developing this vision, where, you know, if we take the profit motive out of the development of technology, we're able to like think about how are we distributing, identifying needs in our communities and distributing resources versus like getting people arrested and getting them involved with the criminal legal system overall.
Yeah, I mean, and this technology is evolving, right? So
Uh-huh.
rapidly, both corporations and the government is finding new, both positive and negative ways, right, to use technology. So
Mhm.
it's something that we need to always be paying attention to, right, with every new app, with privacy and surveillance concerns, but also the ability for technology, as you said, to help us and make our lives easier, which is certainly possible
Exactly.
as well.
Right.
Um, can you talk about the this coalition that you all have created, the Philly Tech Justice Collective,
Mhm.
and the sign-on letter, which has a few demands, which is to make tech transparent, protect communities from surveillance, and getting Philly online?
Right. So yeah, we late last year we put together like this what we're calling the Philly Tech Justice Collective, where we're bringing together a lot of organizations that have identified tech as being a problem, but needing a space to think about how we work on it. And we were able to identify like what are the top line issues that we're seeing from our vantage point, and we're seeing like as you said, surveillance technology, the city's investment in surveillance technology keeps like growing. Um, and then also the need for the city to be investing in technology that will improve people's lives. So that's the PHL Connect Ed program, which we won in 2020, which it completely which expanded broadband access for students across the city, but then also across the country because it became a national program. And there's issues with that, but it was a move generally in the right direction. And then also, which we think is the largest ask here, because we believe in community control and ownership of technology that we use in society, is that the city council actually is best positioned to hold hearings where we can actually learn more about the city's use of technology. And that's because like we've done a little bit of research on the city budget, both in 2024, but then also in 2025. And what we're seeing is that one, um, a lot of the departments, the decisions to adapt technology are made without really real consultation and understanding of how that technology will be used. One of the things that we learned in this current budget season at the police department's budget hearing was that, we are sharing the data that is collected by the surveillance network in Philadelphia, including surveillance cameras, license plate readers, like all of these things. It does get shared with federal law enforcement agencies like ICE, and there are stipulations around that where it needs to be the data access to the data needs to be requested by a law enforcement agency, and there has to be like an active investigation, but that bar is really low. And the question that we pose to city council is like, we are watching this like effort, this dragnet effort of like mass deportations where everyone is getting caught up in the system or is at risk of being caught up in the system. And our question to them is like, if you are not in agreement with this policy, then why are you continuing to make these blind investments into surveillance? And so our hope is that we can pressure them to stop investing in surveillance, and then also to make sure our students continue to get online. But we also need to just create like a procedural process where there can be more community engagement and more feedback, more feedback from the community, specifically talking about how technology is invested in by the city, what it's allowed to do, what it shouldn't be doing, and how we should be trying to protect our communities.
How do you think the city can be more transparent? As you said, like there is a budget process happening right now, and there's been a lot of scrutiny and discussion over the police budget, right? I think a lot of people are not aware that there's a significant amount of money that's earmarked for surveillance, right? Even something like license plate readers, like that's surveillance, body cams, other cameras that they want to put around the city. Now, as journalists at the Hall Monitor, we've been scrutinizing all of that and combing through, and my colleagues have been sitting through these budget hearings, but that's not always accessible to the public. So how can the city better communicate what their intentions are and how they want to be investing our tax dollars into some of these technologies?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, we do think having hearings, like set hearings, ongoing hearings on departments' use of technology is one way. We also think that there should be policy built around there being transparency around what the departments are using and what are the impacts of those uses, which would require for there to be some type of evaluation of the technology on a regular basis. So for instance, the tax office recently, a few years ago, updated their process and automated a big chunk of it so that like they assess taxes in part at least using an algorithm that would then determine how much what your tax liability would be. And our question to them is like, okay, great. You say that this new system is 98% effective across the city, right? But are there any areas or communities where the inaccuracies are concentrated in? Because we know that the prior system that existed led to poor working class communities having a higher tax burden than necessarily like the richer ones, right? And a lot of times, like that data that's produced from those old systems is migrated into these systems so that the technology is just kind of recreating the patterns that we were trying to move away from. And so if you're going to be like a good actor or like, if your intentions are pure, then you should be trying to weed out this this type of inequality, right? In other areas, specifically around the police department, finding out that the police foundation, the Philadelphia Police Foundation, pays for technology for the police department, the foundation being like a foundation, right? Which allows the police department to circumvent the oversight and authority of the city council. Like that is actually a huge problem because part of that oversight is about like a checks and balances system that protects our communities from the policing. Now, I'm an abolitionist, so I don't necessarily believe in this system overall, but we are in a space right now where tech companies are using city council or city budgets, federal budgets, state budgets as a slush fund. Because in reality, what they are doing, the product that they are selling allows for the people, the cities, governments who are buying it to kind of save money, but also like vastly expand their capabilities. And that in and of itself is a problem, right? And so what that means is if you look in the city budget, you may see a piece of tech that the software that they've licensed for like $50,000 a year, right? But that $50,000 software license allows them to have greater control and a greater impact for worse in a lot of cases. That needs to be scrutinized, but it's hard to have that conversation sometimes because like in a budget that's like $6 billion, what is $50,000 and why are we talking about it when there's all these other things happening? And so we're hoping that like the way in which we are working on these issues, talking about the need for greater transparency, more community input will lead to like us being able to kind of parse out like what is the city allowed to do, what is it allowed to do with this technology and how it invests in it, so that we're not necessarily falling into the trap of like arguing over $50,000 because it's like this huge amount of money.
Yeah, it's also an ideological approach too, right? As we're seeing
Hmm.
technocrats infiltrate the White House administration and a lot of the social media like platform company executives advising the president, and companies like Palantir, right, like get big contracts, right, to develop databases to collect information. And I think in general, right, like we tend to think about that at the big corporation like federal national level, when really the stuff that is happening locally is just as much concern, and also the thing that we have more influence and control over as we go through this budget process.
Hmm. Exactly. Like we decided to work on budget season because it was just like a hey, this is like a very easy way and entry point into having these conversations about how we're investing our money, and what purposes, because like ultimately like you know any given department may have 10% of its budget spent on tech. That's not like a actual number, it's just throwing it out there. um, yeah, so any given department may purchase tech, may not, or whatever, but having the conversation of like, why are you investing in technology? Why is it being included in this budget? And why aren't we like thinking more holistically around how we're investing this money? If the goal is to make community safer, if the goal is to get better services, if the goal is to lift Philadelphia out of poverty, right? Then like that, those aren't actually tech problems, right? Like we need, you know, community organizations like EF Philly that provide wraparound services to folks who are at risk of providing being harmed or doing harm, right? We need, more people working in certain offices specifically around like services. We don't need to be automating like these processes. We need more human hands actually engaging, and we do need technology too, but the ultimate goal of that technology should not be to generate profit for a large corporation. And so what that looks like is cities across the country buying these software licenses or building out these like very intricate, programs that they don't actually have the ability to maintain. They need to contract with consultants and whatever in order to maintain those things. And so what that means is that these companies and third parties are actually like reaping or getting contracts year over year that does start to get into the tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars over a period of time. And all of that is a waste because those resources could be going back to the community in order to lift us up out of lift the city up out of poverty. Like one thing I'll say is that our current mayor, Um, her motto is like making Philadelphia clean, green, safe with economic activity for all. And the one through line that we can see in that is that she, like, a big chunk of that is investing in technology in ways that actually aren't felt by the communities that are like wanting this clean, green, safe, and economically prosperous city. So yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can invest billions in screen, or sorry, license plate readers and facial
Hmm.
recognition technology, but that's ultimately not going to eradicate poverty, right? Or, address the opioid crisis. And so
Yeah.
I think when resources are limited, right, like in our current budget cycle shows, I think the question is like how we prioritize those resources to address the most critical problems that Philadelphians are facing. And so,
Hmm.
does technology actually get to a cleaner, greener, safer Philadelphia with economic opportunity for all? Well, that remains to be seen. And one thing I want to note before we go is that one of the tenets of the city's current executive order on sanctuary city is not sharing data between police and ICE. And we're starting to see the administration walk back the sanctuary city policies, at least in narrative form, because the city solicitor was recently heard saying that we are not a sanctuary city, we're a welcoming city. And so that also begs the question, well, what does that mean for these data sharing practices as Philadelphia gets put on a list of cities that are in violation of, helping ICE and Homeland Security, do immigrations enforcement? I think, we're all wondering, do these threats from the Trump administration mean that that executive order, right, is going to be undone and that there will be a policy shift towards more collaboration and data sharing with ICE? So I think we'll have to pay close attention to that and see how that progresses, because activists fought for a long time to stop that practice of data sharing on that software system, which was from many years ago. Of course, new databases and systems are being developed every day. So we'll
Right.
have to wait and see.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's even more complicated with that about that when you realize that the federal government, through state policy, federal law, the grants that they've received, like the city is contractually obligated to make certain data like available upon request to those agencies. And the win that gave us the sanctuary city status was us ending the PARS database and making that executive order not to share data with ICE. Um, and so, yeah, like the question here is like, if you are not down with mass deportation of possibly, which would include possibly like, American citizens too, right? Then like why are we blindly investing in that technology? In addition, I think this is a little different from the immigration conversation as well. Like I also see a trend, which is not scientific, but it's just kind of my noticing that like I also worry that this technology is actually being used to generate new sources of revenue for the city as it's trying to like cut taxes, right? So we saw um, you know, speed camera, like red light cameras that are now sending automatic tickets to people's houses, right? And the speeding cameras and all of those things. And so we're seeing like a ticketing system that's automated. And like if we remember what happened in Ferguson and we remember what happened, like what we learned from the investigations from the federal government under Obama, what we learned is that for Black, Brown, working class communities, we're automatically targeted with those tickets as like a source of revenue for the municipalities that we live under. And I'm wondering if that's the direction that we're going in. And it just paints a picture of kind of what one of the community members we spoke to last year, or the year before last, said that like in essence, the role of technology in the hands of government and big business is that it allows these entities to kind of throw rocks and hide their hands. They can cause harm, but because it's hidden behind this wall of technology, they can also like not be accountable for that harm.
Yeah, technology isn't inherently harmful, right? It depends on who,
Yeah.
who is using it and for what purpose. Same thing with artificial intelligence, right? Like if the people who are feeding it content, right, are racist, right, or evil, then the AI is gonna, put out and do evil stuff. So, we can have ethical AI, we have ethical technology use, but Philadelphians need to organize and fight for that. Devin
Yes.
Washington, I want to thank you so much for being on the Philadelphia Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 FM. If people want to find out more about this initiative and all of the work of the People's Tech Project, you can visit them online at peoplestechproject.org. Thank you so much.
They could also, if you'd like to sign on to the letter and look at it, it's at the PhillyTechJusticeCollective.org.
Sounds good. You heard it right here on the Hall Monitor. Check them out, the People's Tech Project and the collective, the People's Justice Collective as well. Thank you so much, Devin.
Thank you.
All right, Vanessa, thank you so much for that report. And we're going to be following. We have to keep figuring out how technology is evolving and what it's going to be used for and how the city is going to deal with that. So we are appreciative of that. Now we'd like to bring on Lisa Haver to tell us what's going on with the school board.
Hey, Larry, how are you? That was a great,
Good. How are you?
report. Great report from Vanessa, and so much of what she said is kind of part of my thoughts about what's going on with the school board and the school district. Many people may know that at last week's May action meeting, this Board of Education voted 8-1 to approve the creation of a new charter school. And that is the first time that this reinstated board has done that. This board came back in 2018. This is the first time that a new charter school has been created. And we know, people who are observing the district and following this issue know that it's not likely that this means one and done charter school. This is really a signal to the business community and the people in power that the Board of Education has, in many ways, capitulated to the charter industry. And as we've talked about before, APS, the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools, in conjunction with Philly Power Research, did a very in-depth report last year about the patronage system, financial and political patronage system that the charter business sector has created.
Before we move on, can you remind people what we're talking about here, specifically around the salaries for some of the people who work at these charter schools?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because I believe it was Penn Live, the newspaper out of Harrisburg, did a story on this today. APS did this report a couple of years ago, and we're actually updating it. If you want to know how much somebody makes who works for the school district, there's one place you can go online. But charter schools that claim to be public schools, you have to go. We do not know of any other way to do it. Let's put it that way. Maybe professional journalists do, but our members, we just go through each individual IRS 990, which is what you file when you're a nonprofit. And we are updating our information. And we've seen so far 2 charter CEOs. And I want to stress again, when you have a principal and an assistant principal and a dean and all kinds of administrators, you have to wonder, what does the CEO do?
Yeah.
But the CEO of one school in West Philadelphia, according to the most recent IRS 990, was paid by her board. The board of each individual charter or charter company votes on the salaries. took in salary and compensation over $500,000.
Now, remind people how much the superintendent of the Philadelphia school district makes.
His base salary is $335,000.
And he oversees 200 plus schools.
200, I believe the number is 214.
And this person oversees one school.
There's the Mass Schools up in the Northeast, MAST, Mass Schools. Their CEO also went over the $500,000 mark. He CEOs 3 schools, for what that's worth. But, the way that it happened, Larry's was really, there were so many bad things about that meeting, starting with, we found out, APS members found out the day before. So every meeting, and the board has to vote on at the beginning of the year, and they set up a schedule, and it's the 4th Thursday of every month at 4:00. And we found out because one of our members for the past 11 years, since Bill Green, as head of the SRC, tried to cancel the PFT contract, goes to her paper every single morning, and the first thing she looks at is a legal notice. And there it was. We called the district. Nope, it's at 4:00. We looked at the webpage. No, it's at 4:00. No press release, no banner on the website, no social media postings. So we did, finally contact somebody down there that we know. And we were told, yes, that is correct. That legal notice is correct. But, that legal notice, any governing body or agency is going to have a public meeting, has to give at least 24 hours notice. All right. So you may not have violated the letter of the Sunshine Act, but with no press release, no banner on your website, misinformation on your website, that you're definitely violating the spirit of the Sunshine Act. Did you want people to be there or not? And the board and the representatives, President Reginald Streeter and the attorneys gave a reason, which I don't even want to go into, because the reason that they gave the newspapers the day before, we have to have this special item. The very first thing they did when the meeting convened at noon was to withdraw that item.
Yeah.
So, you got to be a little skeptical and say, well, why did they do it? And as you know, the speaker suppression policies of the district, which say, certain number of speakers for 2 minutes, that's it. They do have a waiting list right now, since we pushed back pretty hard on that. 13 of the 30 speakers were there to speak on behalf of the charter school.
Yeah.
13. There was nobody on the list. I know that one of the unions fought to get somebody on the list, but when the list was published, there was nobody on that list who was signed up to speak not in favor of the charter school, to give another point of view. So there was so much,
and that in and of itself, the likelihood of big numbers suggests that is not possible to me.
Which part?
The fact that nearly half the speakers who could have signed up on any topic. Well,
a lot of people, see, this was happening when you sign up. You have to sign up. The meeting's at 4:00 Thursday. The window to sign up, either online or by phone, opens up 4:00 Monday. Mm-hmm. So you can keep signing up, but I was number 92 on the waiting list. So that gives you an idea. So a lot of the people who had signed up and were going to be on the list couldn't come because they were at work, they were in class. And so, you have to look at that list and think, okay, we're not really going to be buying your story. It was, I thought, pretty shameful of the board to do that. They didn't have to do it. Their own bylaws say that if there's some emergency matter that comes up, the board itself can schedule an emergency meeting, and that's what they could have done to take care of that one item that they claimed was the reason, and had the rest of the meeting. So they could have dealt with one item at noon and the other 51 at 4:00, and the students could have been there and the teachers, and the parents could have been there. So there was no reason at all to change that meeting time unless you didn't want some people there and you did want other people there. But I mean, I in a way can't blame them, because what they did was really shameful.
Yeah.
They made it so that people couldn't be there, and they in the way that they voted. This was a revote. This, in charter world, you get to do over as many times, I think, as you want. So charters get rejected and they reapply. And so the vote in February was 6-3. This time it was 8-1. And they're really, like, nobody said, let me tell you why I'm changing my mind. A lot of words were said that didn't really add up. And one problem, I'll put it this way, Larry, it was like going back to the School Reform Commission. It really didn't feel like we had come back to local control, because the School Reform Commission, which was imposed by the state legislature, was all about privatizing public schools.
Yeah.
And so when you see the sneaky way that they did this and the way that they took this vote, boy, it was not a good feeling to think, you know, what are we doing here? Are we going back? And, you know, hearing what Vanessa said about, we're paying a lot of attention to what's going on in Washington, because we have to. But look at what's happening tomorrow in City Council. City Council, led by the Democratic Party, is going to be voting for part of the spending bill of the budget is going to be major tax breaks to businesses, which is classic trickle down Reaganomics. This is like right out of, you maybe you don't remember, some people remember David Stockman, Mr. Trickle Down Economics. That's what City Council's doing.
But
what
not just cutting taxes for large businesses, but raising taxes on smaller businesses.
Right, exactly. So we have this bill that I will not call what the president wants to call it, but we know what we're talking about. There's going to be a major shift in wealth from the bottom to the top, not to mention all the other provisions in that bill. And we've got Philadelphia City Council saying we need to cut business taxes because that will be better for stability. And here we are with the Board of Education turning the clock back and saying, even though most, over half of charter schools are under-enrolled, and some really significantly, even though there's all kinds of problems with academic achievement because the district schools consistently outperform charter schools. Their own data shows that. There was no reason to do this other than to abdicate their role as independent charter authorizers. They aren't supposed to be at every school district.
Yeah.
Every school board is a independent authorizer. And what you saw there wasn't just the charter vote. It was also a vote on an item that was a $300,000 item with the National Institute for Charter Schools. That's a charter lobbying organization based in Michigan. Why is the school district spending $300,000 to hire an outside company? We have a fully staffed charter schools office, and they do really good work. Their reports are very good. Why are we doing this? Because now the signal is we will spend money for your interest. We're not just going to, create more charter schools. We're going to be hiring charter companies and paying them $300,000, and that is a contract which is eligible to be renewed. So there's a lot going on here, but as I said, it's like we're turning the clock back to the corporate control of public schools. We were moving forward. We had a lot of issues, a lot of problems. There's still a lot of, obviously, a lot of issues that need to be resolved. But I will say, Board Member Joyce Wilkerson was the one no vote. And she made a very strong statement. And she talked about how many of the schools, not just charter schools, she said both, are under-enrolled. And she said her word was inconceivable. It's inconceivable to me that we're in the middle of a facilities process, which will result in the closing of neighborhood public schools. She said, we're in the middle of a facilities process. Why would we be now creating a brand new school that's untested?
Why are we seeing this shift and this development of new charter schools?
Well, it's funny. I think that, Board President Reginald Streeter said this, and I know he was on Hall Monitor, so he may have said it on Hall Monitor. He had talked about, when he became president, the depolitization of education, which
Which is impossible.
Which is impossible because you're getting federal funds, state funds, local funds. There's nothing wrong with schools being in the political realm, because when they're in the political realm, you get to choose, what is going on with your schools. Why is it happening? For the same reason Vanessa talked about for-profit detention centers.
Yeah.
Money is being now shifted back to the wealthy and the powerful, even at this level. Yeah. So we will be, the APS members will be there. As a matter of fact, there's a special meeting tomorrow that is just, there's no action. I'm not voting on anything, even though they're calling it action item, tomorrow at 4:00. And that will be supposedly just to talk about charter renewals. I don't know exactly why. And the presentation that the charter school office person is going to be giving isn't posted yet, which is an ongoing problem, because people get up and make presentations, and how do you comment on something that you haven't seen yet?
Right. And, we see that at city council sometimes too.
I got to say, city council, they go through a whole budget process, weeks and months and committee hearings. When something happens at the school board, it's posted and then it's voted on.
Yeah.
And this $300,000 contract, there's no deliberation, no comment. They hardly ever say anything. That's why I said blink and you miss it. There's rarely now, with this group of board members, rarely any deliberation. They just go through the 50 or 60 items, one roll call vote, no comment, we're done. And that is really not what democracy looks like.
No, and it does seem like it's going backwards. In all the years we've been talking about this, it did seem like there was at least some improvement.
I think it's true to some extent. Dr. Hite came in 2012, and then we lost a bunch of schools. But I think really people have to be asking the mayor, and they have to be asking city council, is this what we want? Do we want to go back, to the time of Edison Incorporated, trying to privatize the schools? Privatizing schools is about cutting the people out of decision-making, and a very big part of privatizing schools is union busting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wore a sign last week that said charter schools are non-union shops. So we're going back to this kind of corporate control, and corporate control means the people in the community have less to say, and we're going to run these schools without union protection for the educators who work there.
Yeah. And that creates a bad environment for also the students, because there's less security for their teachers. They're getting paid less. None of it makes any sense.
There was no reason to vote for this charter school at all, other than politics.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that people in the press will lean on Mayor Parker a little bit and say, why is your board voting to privatize schools while you're also closing neighborhood schools?
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Lisa, thank you so much. We'll have you back again soon to continue to give us updates. And we will see you next week on Hall Monitor.
Thank you, Larry.